He is embarking on a very strategic and coordinated plan to return to the White House and consolidate power around him as the president, to remove many of the guardrails that persisted throughout the first term, right? He served one term. He knows who's loyal to him and who's not. He has engineered a far more compliant caucus in the GOP in both the House and Senate. And, what struck me was just how much Trump plans to seize power.
We are back with the man of the hour, Eric Cortellessa, political writer for Time. He has the cover story, "If He Wins," from multiple interviews with Donald Trump. It's the thing everybody's talking about. Eric, thanks for coming on the Bulwark Podcast.
Thanks for having me.
All right, man. First questions first. I mean, obviously you're an intrepid reporter. People should want to interview with you. Everyone should. But let's just be honest. He did this because he wants to be on the cover. Why did Donald Trump do this interview with you? Was it because of the cover or something else?
I can't get inside of his head. I mean, all I can say is, look, there's no question this is a man whose cultural touchstones date back to the 1980s, and he sees being on the cover of Time as the pinnacle of world fame and recognition. I also think I did my job cultivating sources close to President Trump and making the argument that he should be willing to talk to me about what his agenda was for a second term, and that we would present as fairly and comprehensively as we could precisely what he wants to do in his own words in a very straightforward way. And I think we accomplished that.
Yeah, well, the article is good, but I also read the full transcript, all 83 minutes of it. And man, why he gave you that time, I'm not sure, but he revealed a lot I want to get through. But before we get to just the seriousness, if you wouldn't mind, could you just paint a picture for me? Because I am a little bit jealous. I know this seems crazy, but I want to be in a disguise and go into Mar-a-Lago just so I can just experience what is happening there with the Cougars poolside and the weird MAGA celebrities and all this. So would you mind just taking us inside Mar-a-Lago for this interview a little bit?
Well, I mean, it's about how you might imagine it. It's this huge, opulent property right on the ocean in Palm Beach. Everything is extremely ornate, right? And, like the courtyard scene, as I write about in the piece, when we had dinner after the interview, President Trump invited me to stay and have dinner at Mar-a-Lago, and it was a MAGA Mecca that night. Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, was there. Billionaire Steve Wynn was there. And, Donald Trump, right when he walks in after getting his rounds of applause, gets an iPad delivered right to him at his table, where he is with an index finger scrolling through a set list and being the disc jockey for the evening, playing songs by James Brown, Sinead O'Connor, and, from the Phantom of the Opera. And of course, the most striking moment from that evening, as I write in the piece, is at one point, a roar blast from the speakers, and everyone stands up as they play the Star-Spangled Banner, except in this instance, it's a rendition as sung by a choir of defendants who have been imprisoned for attacking the Capitol on January 6th.
Yeah, kind of. It's a safe space, I guess, for the people who have been, written for people who were fallen in the Me Too scandal. You might remember that Steve Wynn had many allegations of sexual misconduct from people working at his casino. I want to get into the substance here, because it's pretty serious stuff. You guys framed the article about if he wins. So what were the things that struck you about his plans? Because there's some elements of it, we'll get into the details, where he's kind of vague in various ways, and he sort of leaves things open to interpretation. There are other ways that he seems to have a very clear plan. So maybe talk through what your impressions were.
Yeah, I mean, my impression, first of him personally, was that he was perhaps more assertive and confident than I've ever seen him before. And he is embarking on a very strategic and coordinated plan to return to the White House and consolidate power around him as the president, to remove many of the guardrails that persisted throughout the first term, right? He's going to have his people in key positions throughout the executive branch, right? He served one term. He knows who's loyal to him and who's not. He has engineered a far more compliant caucus in the GOP in both the House and Senate. As you can see, he's clearing away Senate, primary fields for House and Senate candidates so that he can have his people to approve his agenda and his nominees if he wins for a second term. And, what struck me was just how much Trump plans to seize power in a second term. And he's going to do that through all sorts of different avenues, right? Through his immigration program, where he intends to restore many of the policies he had in the first term and embark on a massive deportation operation. We can talk about that more in a bit. He plans to have greater levels of intervention with Justice Department prosecutions than past presidents have, right? He says he would fire, or be willing to fire at least, a U.S. attorney who didn't follow his orders to prosecute someone. He talks about restoring the power of impoundment, which was outlawed in 1974 as a favorite maneuver of Richard Nixon's to withhold congressionally appropriated funds. He talks about Schedule F, which is the ability to fire civil servants at will. And this is going to be a major tool for his take on what he calls the deep state. He told me he's unlikely to hire people who think that Joe Biden won the 2020 election. And, a big cornerstone of his agenda is, of course, his economic plans, which is to restore the tax cuts from the 2017, many of which will expire early on in 2025, and to impose tariffs on all imports and massive tariffs on Chinese imports. So there's a lot to chew on there.
Nothing says fighting inflation like a 10% tariff across the board. Okay. So, I think that I want to go through the policies of this, but to me, when I read your article, the thing that stuck out, which you just kind of mentioned in that list, was the staffing. I wouldn't feel good about hiring people who don't believe election lies, because and I'd encourage people, we'll put it in the show notes, if people read the full 83 minutes, there's some scary stuff in there on the policies, but a lot of times he's full of it. It's bluster. It's, we'll look into it. It's all this kind of stuff. It's hedging. But the one area where he's not hedging is the staffing question. He does not want to have people around him who are not loyal. And to me, that is the part that I think is very different from the first administration, where some of these more extreme ideas that weren't implemented, I feel much more likely to be implemented, but if there is a litmus test that you have to go along with his 2020 lie to get in there. And so, talk about how that struck you and what you kind of see as a change on the staffing front.
Yeah, Donald Trump says, look, when I came into office in January 2017, I didn't know people in Washington. I had to rely on people. And so he had a lot of people who were close to him, like Reince Priebus and others, who helped him fill cabinet roles. And these were kind of traditionalist, old line Republican stalwarts. He brought in some people from Wall Street, right? And his plan this time is none of that. Everyone I'm going to bring in is going to be a MAGA true believer, because I want the people in government to carry out my agenda and my vision. In their eyes, right, they will have a mandate by being elected, and they want to install not only the cabinet picks and people, and White House officials who are Trump loyalists. They want the bureaucracy, right, to serve Trump's vision. And that's a really big thing that they're taking on this time. I don't think they're as worried about picking certain people. Who they'd be able to get through their cabinet nominees, depending on the makeup of Senate, that's a big wild card in this discussion. But the real thing that they are targeting to go after the deep state is unelected career government bureaucrats. And that's right, where Schedule F comes in.
Yeah. Let's talk about the immigration side. I thought that you were really like a dog with a bone on him on this stuff, which is good because he tries to evade. And but he basically in the end comes to this and says that he'd be happy to break the existing laws in order to enforce the deportation regime that he wants, whether that includes military, whether that includes incentivizing local police forces. A lot of that, the implications of that seem pretty scary. The camps, he was maybe kind of dodging around whether he actually wants camps, but Stephen Miller, the types of people that he would appoint, which goes back to our staffing question, they do. So, yeah, just talk through kind of the extent that he seems to be willing to go to actually follow through on an extreme nativist immigration agenda.
Well, this is like one of Donald Trump's signature campaign issues, and it's been a Trumpian obsession since, the dawn of his political emergence. And I think if there's at least one thing you would expect him to go full throttle on, it's going to be immigration. And this is an area where he's really going to try and seize his executive authority, right? Some of the things he plans to do, it's just a restoration of what he did the last time. in Mexico, Title 42. They'll come up with different justifications for the emergency measures to do that. But when it comes to the deportation operation, he said he plans to use the National Guard. He said he would try to induce local police departments by saying, like, tying funding to whether or not they would participate in helping them to find and remove undocumented migrants. And when I pressed, sir, would you be willing to use the military? His answer was, well, I would use the National Guard, but if I felt I needed to, I'd be willing to bring in the military. At which point I pointed out, sir, the Posse Comitatus law prohibits the use of the military on civilians. And he basically said he doesn't see undocumented migrants as civilians. That's not how the law sees it, but that's how Trump sees it. And so, I think he's preparing to really follow through on this from starting on day one.
I have to pick on you, and one thing I was going to save it for the last question, but you just did it. Do we have to call him sir? Do we have to? Do you feel like that is? Do you feel like that's necessary? I mean, I don't know. He loves being called sir. I don't know. Are you calling every politician sir? You think it's okay?
He was former president. I spoke to him in a way that I think offered him a level of respect. And all I can say is, look, Donald Trump spoke to me at length and told me things he hasn't told other reporters.
That's true. I have to think. It made me think about it. I'm interviewing a governor today, which will be on the podcast later this week. And I'm like, what am I?
Go ahead and call him
governor?
sir. I encourage you.
Sir, am I going to do sir? I don't think that Mr. Trump. I don't think that Donald is going to be letting me into Mar-a-Lago, but if he were to, I don't know that I would go sir. But I respect it. I know what you're trying to do. Okay, I want to talk about the abortion thing. And this is like the same trap he's been in literally since Chris Matthews 9 years ago. And you asked him, I thought very kind of astutely, about this question of, would he be concerned? I don't know if your exact phrasing in front of it, or would he have worries or issues with states monitoring women's pregnancies? Because if you're going to put in 12-week abortion ban, or 6-week, which just went into enforcement in Florida, well, how are you going to exactly prove that the abortion happened after 6 weeks? Are you going to monitor the pregnancies? And he basically said he feels comfortable with that.
Yeah, I mean, Donald Trump, ever since the overturning of Roe versus Wade, with the essential sign off on his 3 Supreme Court appointments, has had to thread a very delicate needle on this, because he knows that, while the base really wants him to be against abortion, it doesn't play with the rest of America, right? So he has basically said that this is going to be a states' rights issue, and that whatever the states determine as their policy, he's going to let fly. And so when I asked him specifically, well, sir, would that mean you're comfortable with states monitoring women's pregnancies to know if they've gotten an abortion after the ban? He said to me, they might do that. And when I said, sir, would you be comfortable with states prosecuting women who've gotten abortions after the ban? He said, it's irrelevant whether I'm comfortable or not, because states are going to make that determination. I should specify, he didn't say he wanted the states to do that, but that he would let them do that, because he believes, at least he's saying, he believes that it's a states' rights issue and that he's going to stay away from it. Now, I should also say, when I pressed him repeatedly to commit to vetoing any kind of federal restrictions on abortion, he demurred and said, I don't have to veto, because it's never going to come to my desk again.
Yeah. One of the funniest parts of it was a 2-part interview. So you're with him at Mar-a-Lago, and then I guess there's a follow-up on the phone. When you're with him at Mar-a-Lago, you ask him about mifepristone and the morning after pill, and there's a lot of questions about whether certain states, they're going to try to criminalize access to this kind of to mifepristone or other related pharmaceuticals. And he kind of gives you, we're going to announce something about that in 2 weeks. Then you call him back 2 weeks later, and that's your first question. And maybe you can share whether you come up with a policy on that yet by the time you talk to him the second time.
Yeah. Each time it was coming in 2 weeks.
Okay. Just like the healthcare plan. Well, I mean, did he seem to you, this is one of those things maybe it's harder to judge looking at the transcript. Did he seem to know what you were talking about even, or, was he ducking it, or was he just lost? Like, how do you assess it?
I will say, I think Donald Trump knew most of everything I asked him about. Maybe not everything, I'm not sure, but sure. I think look, he's a really smart guy. And I think a lot of people throughout the mainstream press and the political class continue to underestimate Donald Trump. And, he is much smarter than a lot of people give him credit for. We can analyze what type of intelligence we're talking about here, but the guy's smart. And I got a sense with each question, he knew what I was talking about. And in a lot of cases, was really careful and cagey with his language when providing answers.
He also, one other thing I wanted to you to talk about, because you went at him about it a few times. He didn't seem to really be supportive of Bibi. A lot of the kind of mild crowd, the more nationally security minded establishment, right, has been critical of Biden for the ways that he's distanced himself from Bibi and various Israel policies, despite the fact that he's been directionally supportive. And so I think it's interesting. That's going to be an important crowd, like this Haley voters, an important swing vote in this election. And so I did think it was interesting that Trump was doing a little bit of a two-step on that himself. How did you assess his answers when it came to Israel?
Yeah, I mean, it seems pretty clear to me that there's a profound bitterness between the two men, that, Donald Trump resents Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu for a number of reasons. He cited to me his anger that Netanyahu and Israel backed out of what was planned to be a joint operation to take out Qasem Soleimani, a top Iranian general, in 2020, and it ended up being a unilateral mission by the United States. But we also know that he took great offense when Netanyahu congratulated President Biden after winning the 2020 election. I think there's bad blood between the two. And some of the comments that Trump said to me were some of his harshest against Netanyahu to date. He said, I had a bad experience with Bibi. When I asked if he thought he could work better with Benny Gantz, he said he wasn't prepared to say that, but there were a lot of other people in Israel who could do a good job. So that was quite a stinging rebuke of the Israeli premier. He also said that if Israel and Iran were to get into a war, he would join Israel in the fight and be willing to strike Iran militarily.
Yeah. A lot of interesting stuff, man. A lot to chew on. We'll be talking about you tonight because we are live in Philly doing a Next Level podcast. That'll be up for people tomorrow on Thursday. If you want to hear kind of a deeper analysis and look at the implications of your reporting, we'll be discussing that tonight. We'll be discussing it the rest of the week. It seems like everybody's discussing it. So congratulations on the interview. Stay in touch. We'll hope to have you back on the Bulwark Podcast sometime soon.
Love to be back. Thanks for having me.
All right, thanks. That's Eric Cortellessa from Time Magazine, national political reporter. Thanks to him. Thanks to Benjamin Wittes. We'll be back here on Thursday. We got a fun interview for you, so make sure to check us out tomorrow. See y'all then. Peace.